Winners win. I'm a winner. We're going to win.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_GB, coming at you right here with Will Miles at Will Miles SEC, right there on the socials as well. Mainly X, I guess. But yeah, here we are. Will, Gators kind of putting the close on the transfer portal. Might be another get or two, as it's not completely closed yet. But I don't think anybody really of any impact right now. It's just some big name from Indiana, Miami enter, and Florida gets in the mix for one of those guys or something like that. But we'll see where that goes. But we'll go take a look at the roster and take a couple questions that we got through the mailbag today that I posted on X. So we got more. We'll get into those questions eventually as well. This is kind of get us through a couple of few episodes. We'll see where it goes. But I knew this one, we were going to kind of do this anyway. But I was like, let me open up the mailbag. And then Gators Breakdown Plus member Bull Gator sent a pretty detailed question. And that was kind of going to be our template for going through the roster a little bit. Since Florida got these, I think, 27, 28 transfers in for the Gators. So we'll take a look at the roster that way. But Will, man, Indiana beats Miami national championship game. Season's over with. We turn the page, but no more football games until September.
Yeah, well, as somebody who grew up a Hoosiers fan, and my dad was like a pig in slop last night. He's Indiana alum, so we've been watching sort of together. And, I always talk about how Gator football is an opportunity for us to come together because he works there at the university, and obviously I went there, so we've bonded over that. But he had the opportunity to gloat yesterday, that's for sure. And, look, I'm happy. The Indiana has been so bad for so long, and now the ironic thing is that Florida would trade the national championship in basketball last year for like a playoff appearance, and Indiana would trade their 16-0 football season for a national championship in basketball. I still think we should try and get the Todd Golden for Signetti trade straight up and see if we can figure that out with the Hoosiers. But very interesting season, interesting time in college football. Certainly, a lot of reflection amongst the writers in college football today. I think some of it warranted, some of it probably not. But
the question from On 3, Ari and Andy Staples: Stars Matter is dead.
I got to tell you right now, Bill Sykes is in a cave somewhere, writing a treatise. Like he's gonna have like a manifesto that comes out when On 3 goes underneath.
We talked about it on the Discord a little bit too. So no, they're not completely dead, by the way. Just different path.
So I think this. It's funny because earlier this year, before Florida had a head coach, I was asking. I said sort of tongue in cheek, but actually quite seriously in terms of the overall conception, is that I wanted Florida to go after Andrew Friedman because I thought that baseball very closely simulated the environment that college football is entering into, in terms of no rules on contracts. You can get really creative. Like how do you bend the rules without potentially getting yourself in trouble, either from a legal perspective or an NCAA perspective, or even from your buddies at the school next to you that are in the same conference as you, getting ticked off at you for sort of setting a new precedent, all those sorts of things. And, I think the reality is that there are multiple ways to build a program now, whereas 10 years ago, there was just one way. Yep. Right. It was Dodge Chargers and go after Saban. That was really the only way. That was really the only way to build a program. I think Indiana has indicated that you can build a program in a different way. I think what's going to be interesting is if you think about baseball back in the Moneyball days when Oakland was playing really well, the concept there was they were doing something different than the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Cubs, all those sorts of teams. Look, the Cubs were terribly managed for 100 years. Yeah. So even if you have all the money in the world, it doesn't matter if the management is a fiasco. Both Boston and Chicago are great views of that. However, when they got a guy like Theo Epstein in Boston and in Chicago, he was able to turn those teams into champions by using a lot of the techniques that Oakland did. And so I think that's really sort of the question I'm asking coming out of that game last night is actually for both teams, right? Like Miami in an easier conference, certainly able to lose a couple of games, but able to compete with the big boys up front. I mean, that game last night was close.
Mhm.
And in fact, if you look at some of the advanced stats, Miami probably should have won it. If not for the block punt,
Block punt,
and
yep.
the fourth down play, they probably do win that game. So you start looking at stuff like that, but then obviously you look at the other side, and that's where everybody starts making the stars don't matter argument and that sort of stuff.
They don't matter as much.
Well, Signetti would immediately make Florida a playoff team.
Yeah.
I put it that way, right? Like, I believe that if Florida was able, like if Signetti had not signed an extension and Indiana had missed the playoff this year or whatever, for some reason, like let's say Mendoza got hurt in like the 8th game, and so Signetti was available and they didn't sign him to an extension, and then Signetti was available and he pulled a Lane Kiffin and he comes to Florida. Well, I think Florida is an immediate playoff contender. And I think that's the thing that sort of, like, even if you think about like the Patriots right now, right? They were terrible last year with Gerard Mayo as a head coach. Mike Vrabel, and they make a couple of adjustments to personnel. There's some development at quarterback, and all of a sudden the Patriots are in the AFC Championship game. It can turn that quickly when you've got a coaching staff that knows what it's doing. And
here in Jacksonville, a lot of the same story for the Jags.
Well, and again, if you think of college football as sort of like a mixture between the NFL and Major League Baseball, then what you're really looking at is something where, in the NFL, it's the thing that stops you from building is that salary cap, where you end up in salary cap hell, right? Well, there isn't a salary cap in college football. And so, you should be able to build yourself out of this stuff as you go. Now, look, I still think that fundamentally having 5-star quality production is going to matter. The difference is that one of the things that the Stars Matter people have been saying for years is that once you get, and I mean, I wrote an article about this specifically like 3 or 4 years ago where I called it the 5-3 theory. And I basically said, spend on the 5 stars and then don't worry about the 4 stars, because the 4 stars and the 3 stars go to the NFL at the exact same rate or at very similar rates. So on a amount of the contention I made at the time was that if you're spending a lot of time recruiting a 4-star in California or Colorado or out west, that was a waste of time, because you'd be better off focusing on a 3-star who was sitting right in your backyard. He's just as likely to go to the pros. Well, if that's the case, then there is a little bit of stars don't matter then, right? Because what that means is if you've got 200 3-stars who go into or really it's more like 1,000, I think, 3-stars every year who go into college football, when the 20 of those guys who show out at the G5 level prove that they have the ability to produce, well, now you're picking from a much more limited subset, right? And if you have the funds and the ability to recruit them and all that sort of stuff, now you can go get somebody. I mean, Elijah Surratt, the wide receiver, the JMU transfer, had 82 catches the year that he was at JMU and then transfers to Indiana. Well, I mean, if Florida was bringing in a guy right now at 82 catches last year, we'd be pretty excited about that guy in the wide receiver room, even if he was coming from Ferris State like Trinidad Champ was, right? Like, we would still be excited about that level of productivity. I think we were all excited about Ricky Pearsall when he came in. He had over 60 catches. Same thing with Elijah Badger when he came in from Arizona State. He had been a productive player out there at Arizona State. So, once a guy's proven that he can play, the statistics from high school no longer are like the ruling longer the ruling metric. So to look at somebody who's got 2 years in college and go, oh, well, he was a 3-star. Yeah. A bunch of 3-stars end up drafted in the NFL. That's not the contention we're making. The contention was 10 years ago, you had to decide, and it was a percentages game, right? Because once that guy committed to your program, he wasn't going anywhere. So you had to be right, because getting him off the roster was just as big a pain in the butt as getting him on to start with. And that doesn't exist anymore. So, a nuanced argument, I suppose. And I'm probably not one that would get clicks to go out there and say it depends, but the reality is it depends. And I'm still not ready to say that, that
Ohio State, Alabama. Yeah. Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, they're not going to go out there and stop recruiting 5-stars and 4-stars. And I'm sure Signetti is going to start with, now the notoriety of Indiana right now, can go out there and get a lot more of those guys now, and will do so.
Now, I think what will happen is that teams are going to realize that they can use the G5 as the training ground.
Yeah.
Right. That for certain positions, especially, they will find, and look, the NBA found this. That's why they decided to do the one and done at college, right? Is they were missing too much on the guys that they grabbed from high school. And they said, wow, we're spending an awful lot of money on these guys in high school who come straight to the pros. If they go and play a year in college, we'd get another look at them and we'd be able to figure out who's actually going to be good. And so they collectively bargained to keep those guys in college, which is why the one and done even existed. But what it did was it gave them another year to evaluate, and the draft boards changed drastically once those guys had to spend a year in college. And would the Cavaliers have not taken LeBron James number 1 if he'd had to go play at Duke for a year? No, it still would have been clear he was the number 1 guy, right? But there are other guys who worked their way up. Like I think like a guy like Stephen Curry who goes to Davidson and lights it up there in multiple years. He was a guy who in this environment probably would have played a year or two at Davidson and then would have gotten picked up by Duke or North Carolina or UCLA, or hey, maybe Indiana would be able to pick him up because that's the team that I'm going to root for in college basketball. Florida, Florida would have been able to pick him up. And I think it's going to be the same thing moving forward. The question I have, and I think it's actually this is the question that interests me the most, is the statement I made earlier about the Red Sox and the Cubs catching up to Oakland, right? I've always had it in my mind as Indiana's been making this run that Indiana is more like Oakland, right? That now maybe Mark Cuban changes that a little bit, but that Indiana's more like Oakland in that they're not a blue blood, but they have found a way to utilize the system to their advantage in a way that we can study and learn from. And if you're a team with more resources than a team like Indiana or Vanderbilt or somebody else who's utilized the transfer portal really, really well over the last 2 or 3 years, well, now that we sort of have as things start to settle into more normal circumstances, and we'll see, college football is always changing. But as we start to normalize into a more normal situation, will the big boys start to exert their muscles in the correct ways, right? I think now there's been an awful lot of resource waste where it's like, oh, well, we've developed this quarterback for 3 years. We have to stick with him. Like I think of Ty Simpson played okay at Alabama this year, but he wasn't really a difference maker. I mean, maybe he goes high in the draft, but that's going to be because teams are desperate, not because he played that great this year. And would Alabama have been better served going out and getting a guy in the portal and bringing him in and having somebody that they were more comfortable with in their system than Simpson? That might be something that we start to see in the future, is that you basically prepare your roster for specific positions to bring those guys in. I think wide receiver and quarterback are really sort of the ones where production is pretty clear. And then you just need a guy like Sig, right? I mean, Signetti, you look at every quarterback he's had over the last 4 years at JMU and at Indiana, they've all improved significantly between the year before and the year after Sig took over. And it turns out when you get outstanding quarterback play, you're hard to beat.
Yeah. Topic for another day, but one aspect that I think might come out of this, these big high school classes, I think are a thing of the past. You're going to leave room for the transfer. If the transfer portal stays the way it is and guys can move around like they want, and going to your point where, all right, we're going to let somebody else develop these guys. All right, I'm going to be saving roster spots now and not signing 25, 30 high school guys. I'm going to make sure I have room for the farm system that is the G5 to go develop those guys, and I'm gonna go pick them up. So I mean, maybe a topic for another day. And signing day is coming up. There's going to be a lot of teams I still think that live in that world, and that might be a year by year basis. You might have a year where you go 25, 30 high school. I still think in the trenches, where in offensive line, you probably want defensive line. You probably want to get those guys young, early, develop, and get a rapport with them. But some of the skill players and some of the other positions, I think you're kind of left up in the air a bit. And I mean, maybe some of this comes out with what you can attack first. When the signing day move, the signing day get moved, what does the transfer portal look like? What does the new college football calendar look like? It might go into some of that equation as well. But Will, I mean, I think years and years of 25, 30 high school guys, I don't know we see that a whole lot anymore.
So I I think it's going to be something where you still see a lot of guys sign from high school.
I mean, USC just did it where they signed like 35 kids.
There were a couple teams that did that. And so I think this is what I meant by there are multiple ways to build a program, right? Yeah. And you're not necessarily going to know what the best way is until you start breaking down the teams that have been successful. And one of the things that's going to be interesting and probably good for the sport overall is that if there are multiple ways to build a winner, then it's not just, oh, well, we got out recruited by Saban this year and Kirby this year, so we're going to get our butt kicked, which honestly was essentially the evaluation for 3 straight years with Dan Mullen. It was, Kyle Trask is good enough to beat Georgia, but he's not good enough to beat whatever that crap defense was that Florida put out on the field. And we wasted a year where we had somebody who might have won, who was probably worthy of Heisman Trophy consideration, but the defense was so bad that he just never really got a campaign off the ground. So I think there are different ways to build. The interesting thing for me will be what happens to the money at the high school level. So, if really, because what you're paying for is like at the wide receiver position, you're paying dollars per reception, right? Or dollars per yard per target or whatever stat you decide is worthwhile for a player. That's really what you're paying for. And so if you bring a guy in, you got to be pretty sure he's going to stick, right? But also, could you pay a guy $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 to sit on the bench and develop? I think the answer is probably no. So I think what you're going to find is that the high school players, if they want to come to Florida, want to come to Alabama, want to come to Georgia, are probably going to take, that there's going to be like a G5 starter money, and the Power 5 teams will come in a little bit below that in terms of like the offers. And the kids will have to decide, am I going to go to Tulane? Am I going to go to, Sam Houston State? Or am I going to go to Florida and develop? The money's going to be about equivalent. But, the days of it was like 2 years ago that the 5-star guys were probably commanding ridiculous amounts of money through NIL. I think the days of giving somebody 3 months, like Nico Oyebadejo for Tennessee, the days of an $8 million contract for a quarterback coming straight out of high school are probably over. I think what you will find is that you will find that guy is going to be worth less than the guy in the transfer portal who's already played snaps and what you're going to get. Maybe for the 5-star guys, it'll be a little bit different, but you think about like the Felipe Frankses of the world and sort of where they sit in terms of recruiting rankings, big time arm, a lot of development necessary. That's not something that that's not a guy you're going to break the bank for moving forward at a Power 5 school. You would let a Power 4 school, you'd let a G5 school train him up and then you'd steal him from them.
For sure. A lot of ways to look at it. A lot more time to break that down as, we learn more about the portal and high school recruiting. But we can come back around to that. But we'll get to these questions and all that stuff coming here in this episode of Gators Breakdown. Everybody hit that like button as we move forward here and leave some comments. The comment section's been going pretty steady right here. Subscribe right here on the YouTube version or your favorite podcast version or your favorite podcast platform as well. But either way, hit that like button. That support goes a long way right here, especially on the YouTube side of things. And then, of course, go ahead to MyBookie. And it's already up. You can get in right now at MyBookie to go bet for next season's national champion. Ohio State leads the way at plus 650 odds. Indiana, Notre Dame next at plus 700. The Gators coming in with a top 20 odds at plus 6,000. So get in right there. Bet the futures right there at MyBookie. Also, of course, it is championship weekend in the NFL. So it's time to get in on all the betting action right there at MyBookie. New England, 5.5-point favorites at Denver. Of course, no Bo Nix for the Broncos. The over-under for that game set at 42. And then Seattle, 3-point favorites at home over the Rams with an over-under at 47.5. All this for a chance to go to the big game in San Francisco. Go bet it all right there at MyBookie. It's your one-stop sports book and casino all in one account, one wallet, bet football, and then go play those casino games. Don't have to switch apps. Don't have to jump to another platform. All the action right there at MyBookie. And if you're new, use our promo code Gators to get your first bet up to $500 fully covered. Make your play. If it doesn't hit, you get it right back with the bet back bonus. Sign up, mybookie.ag with promo code Gators and go claim your bet back bonus. Let's go. So, like I said, not Florida's probably mostly done in the portal, maybe a player here or there for some depth, but I don't think anything major. We'll go through the roster. We'll go through some of the portal talk. We'll be doing that, like I said, with some questions submitted by you guys out there that will take us through some of this episode, the next episode. So if we don't get to it tonight, look for it in later episodes. But this one is going to get us started from a Gators Breakdown Plus member. That's Bull Gator. You do hear him on the chats every now and then. He goes, I do not mean to beat a dead horse, but looking at the portal class as it stands now, I am wondering where are the immediate proven starters, particularly difference makers at premium positions, who will materially raise the team's ceiling in 2026. Sumrall seems to have improved the roster numerically or structurally, but I cannot see whether the roster has improved such that as it has more talent. Seems that Florida will be relying on coaching and quote unquote potential gains to compensate for the talent gap between Florida and some of its tougher opponents. So going through good stuff there from Bull Gator and asking us questions. And I think, when we're looking at getting starters, we first need to look at where Florida may have needed some starters through the transfer portal. Quarterback, one more, quarterback possibly. We know they brought in Aaron Philo, competition with Tramel Jones. One more quality receiver, the starting receiver in a group of three, tight end, couple of offensive linemen, specifically tackle, defensive tackle, nose guard, safety, corner. I think there's spots I think you were probably looking for starters out of the transfer portal. And then looking at the roster, we'll go through kind of the quarterback skill players here. I think, 2 of the 3 starting wide receivers were set. You had VB3 and Dallas Wilson. If you're losing 3 wide receiver sets for your basis here, Florida had 2 of them, I think, with those guys moving forward. Running back was set with Jaden Ball. Right tackle probably set with Caden Jones. Left guard set with Harris, I believe. And then, of course, if you go to, defense and, starting to look at it at edge, I think you had starters there already with Jaden Woods coming back, Cam James. Maybe could have elevated it, but I think you did have some starters already just kind of waiting. Linebacker, of course, Miles Graham, Aaron Childs, Jaden Robinson leading the way. I think you linebackers are set as far as starters goes. I think, Bryce Thornton, certainly at safety, likely one of the safety spots locked up for him. And then, one of, if not 2, cornerback spots. You got Dijon Johnson, Cormani McLean, Hanks, Flowers, to kind of throw into the mix there. Flowers could be moved to nickel. We'll see how that kind of shakes out there for Florida. But we do know Florida did try to get one of the top corners in the portal with Jontez Williams, to upgrade the room. That was obvious, but he ends up going to USC. So out of the 22 starters, I think you already had about half already on the roster before you started bringing in the portal guys. So I think that's where I start first, Will, is how many starters I think Florida already had by the retainment, by guys who, were sticking around and not leaving Florida, didn't go, not having to go through the draft or, transfer portal yet. Just that's how I see it shaking out. About half of the 22 offensive, defensive starters, you probably already had your starters there to take over.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Florida was 4-8 last year, but there were winnable games in that schedule. I mean, you look at the South Florida game, that was winnable. LSU game, that was winnable. The Texas game, obviously, they won. The Georgia game, that was winnable. Ole Miss was winnable. So, the team was not really, really, really far away from being 8-4. And when people look at Indiana and go, well, look at all the guys he brought from JMU and look at how he built. Again, this is what I was meaning earlier when I'm like, there are multiple ways to skin this cat, depending upon what you've got going on. There wasn't a Jaden Woods to retain at Indiana, right? They went out and got Curtis Rourke to be the quarterback because there wasn't anybody there. Now, Florida had DJ Lagway. for whatever reason, whether his decision or Sumrall's decision, he decides to move on. And hey, they got to bring in a quarterback, and we'll see what they can do. I think, again, quarterback is the most important position on the field. It's the most important. It's the thing that every year, really, every time I write the preseason magazine, I've got a section called How the SEC Was Won. It almost always divides up into good quarterback play and poor quarterback play in terms of who was good overall. So then the question you got to ask is, well, what leads to good quarterback play in terms of the skill players that you have out there? Certainly, I think Jaden Baugh qualifies as a security blanket there. But I mean, again, if you go back and look at Indiana, and I'll harp on them because I think it's good to say it wasn't all JMU transfers. So Omar Cooper, who made a bunch of big catches last night, actually led the Hoosiers in catches with 69. He was an Indiana recruit prior to Cignetti's arrival. Then you got Charlie Becker, who had 34 catches this year, the big back shoulder catches in that college football playoff championship, the two of them that were like big time deals. That was a Cignetti recruit at Indiana. And then you got Elijah Surratt, who's the JMU transfer, at 65 catches. So that wide receiver room was a combination of guys who were already there, guys that Cignetti brought in from high school recruiting, and guys that Cignetti brought in through the transfer portal. And it was really a 2-year process to get that. Again, same thing with defense. If you look at Aiden Fisher, he had 10.5 tackles for loss. Look at Mikhail Camara. He had a big-time block punt in the championship. But their big-time defensive end, Daly, who hurt his knee after the Big Ten championship game, like that guy was a Kent State transfer after this year, right? So it's not like you're done after year one. And I think that's the thing that when we're evaluating what Jon Sumrall's doing, what Buster Faulkner's doing, what Brad White's doing, we do need to evaluate with a little bit of a window, not a 4-year window like the discussions of Billy Napier. And I mean, when you had Danny Orfel on here, one of the questions I asked you to ask him was, what do you consider successful after year 2? What do you consider successful after year 3? And I think, the reality is that, Danny recognizes what everybody recognizes, which is that the turnover is much, much quicker now. But I think the other aspect of that is that, one, Florida was not as far away as Indiana was when Cignetti came in.
Right.
And then I think the second thing that we need to recognize is that this is not a 1-year turnaround thing. So I mean, if I go look at Florida's roster with the guys that they brought in, I mean, Eric Singleton had what? He had a ton of catches last year. Yeah. PFF rating of 64.7, but he was at 37, or he was up over 70, 72.1 and 71.3 at Georgia Tech. I think he had like 58 catches last year. And he's got something like 150 catches in his career.
I think 100. I was going to get into him later, but just for not to spoil one of the next questions, but just the stats you're throwing out: 162 career receptions and 2,000 yards.
So again, if we're talking about Pearsall, if we're talking about Elijah Badger, Shamir Dike, the guys who've come in and been successful in the portal, that guy fits that mold. So I don't know that it's necessarily fair to say that there's no difference makers. I think it's probably fair to say that 2 years out, Cignetti hit on the guys that he brought in from James Madison, right? That we're talking about Kamara and Fisher and Surratt and Rourke and Mendoza, not necessarily JMU guys, but guys he brought in through the portal. Like, he hit on these guys in a way that most people don't. And I think probably an unreasonable expectation to hit at that rate. But I think that is something, we even talked about it last week in terms of like the familiarity of the guys who are being brought in. That there's Penn State guys, there's Tulane guys, there's Georgia Tech guys, and they make up a large segment of the guys who are coming to Florida. And ostensibly that's because Florida's coaches now have a scouting advantage on these guys that they're bringing to Gainesville. And so, I think if you had asked people to evaluate the transfer portal that Curt Cignetti brought in 2 years ago, they would have been, it's not great. And those guys would have been
13 James Madison. I guarantee you so many people would have said, 13 guys from JMU, really?
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, right? Is that, and I think people, and I'm one of them, looked and said, Fernando Mendoza, like he's just coming to like beat out his brother, like what's going on here? And that's sort of just the reality of evaluating at this point.
Yeah.
So Indiana had 31 guys come in through the transfer portal, 2 4-stars, 26 3-stars back in 2024. So D'Angelo Pons, big time hit, right? You got Elijah Surratt, big time hit. I mean, you just start going down the line. Curtis Rourke, big time hit, was a big. Aiden Fisher, big time hit. Mikhail Kamara, big time hit.
Yeah, I think the big one for me are the trenches. Like that usually takes time. They were able to hit there. Like I know for Signetti, especially because of what they did last year and their offense, that it just took off. But this year, their defense, man, that's what I did not expect from Indiana.
Well, I mean, again, I think I'm naming like the skill players and the guys who like jump out, and I couldn't tell you who the 5 starting offensive linemen are without going and looking it up. But yeah,
the transfer from Notre Dame this past year.
Well, so again, I think so there's 2 things that I think are important to say. One is that I do not believe that Florida should build like Indiana.
Correct.
I don't think that doing it the exact same way. I think you'll be behind if you try to build like Indiana. I think you have to build like Florida, and Florida has unique advantages, and Florida probably has unique disadvantages compared to Indiana, right? I mean, Signetti had to convince people that you could win big at Indiana. No one should have to convince anybody you got to win big at Florida, right? So like the hurdle to bringing somebody in is very, very different. At the same time, you're not necessarily like going to be in anonymity if you come to Florida in the same way you were at Indiana a couple years ago. And so the upside going to Indiana might have been a lot higher than the upside going to Florida. That's something Sumrall will have to sell. So again, just different situation, but I think very, like if you'd have looked at Indiana's, and honestly, I think if you'd have looked at Miami's transfer portal in 2024, or Miami's recruiting classes, because Miami built their class a lot different, right? You start talking about Samson Okolona, Mao and Noah on the offensive line. Fletcher was a guy that Florida wanted at running back. He ends up, so they kind of built their team through high school recruiting, brought in Malachi Toney this year, Carson Beck through the portal, but there wasn't like this list of transfers at Miami when we were going through that roster last night in the same way that you did with Indiana. And so, but again, it took Cristobal 4 years to build to a place where the team is ready to go there. And I don't know that Florida fans have that kind of patience to go through that kind of rebuild. And if Miami had had a similar season to what Florida did this year, those programs were pretty much at the same general level. I mean, you can say Cam Ward coming in when the Heisman sort of raised everything, but if Carson Beck had come and fallen on his face this year, would Cristobal have survived? I don't necessarily know. And so, and I think the same, I won't say the same is true next year. They went far enough in the playoffs that he's probably won himself a couple of years worth of grace, but you could see a program that has not really embraced the transfer portal in the same way that an Indiana has or some other programs. Maybe that's the way to build now, and they're going to start falling back because of it. So I think whoever's in front is the one who's going to win. And the question that I have,
let's not just a year ago, Ohio State was hoisting the trophy.
Yeah.
I mean, just so we can sit here and say, yes, that the Indiana model, it's still going to be, going to your point earlier, there's going to be many ways to build here.
So I said this last week. I was like, back in 1990, Georgia Tech and Colorado were going to be powers, right? and they've been terrible ever since, pretty much. Georgia Tech now is like a breeding ground for Florida's offensive coordinator. Whereas in 1990 they were sharing a national championship, and I think that's the thing, right? It's the inherent in the question is, well, like there should be 14 proven players flocking to Gainesville, and I don't think that's necessarily. I think that would cost too much money, to be honest with you. I think if you went out and got only proven guys, then, well, there's 2 things. One is you're paying for past productivity. And so you have to guarantee that you'll get at least similar productivity. But the other thing is productive guys are expensive. And so if you can project that a guy is going to be productive, well, you don't have to pay him as much as the guy who's already been productive. So then it comes down to what do you need in the field, right? And I think a guy like Singleton is somebody where you go, okay, we project what Vernell Brown Jr. will do. We project what Dallas Wilson will do. But now we have a guy who sets the floor at a place where even if those 2 guys have a hiccup or an injury or something like that, our wide receiver room's still pretty solid, and sort of check it off that way.
Yep. So, look, I think if you're looking for immediate proven starters like Bull Gator put out in the question, then, you're right. I don't think there's a whole lot of them through the portal now. Eric Singleton Jr., I think he's one, kind of just going through the list here. like Emmanuel Oyebadejo on the defensive line coming from Jack State. I think he can be instant, immediate, proven starter. DJ Coleman at safety, Cam Dooley, who Kentucky was really high on. I think both those guys, Coleman, Cam Dooley, come into the backfield and make immediate impact. And then, of course, I didn't include them in the 22, but should be overlooked, Will. I mean, the special teamers, I think you got your starting punter and your starting kicker from Tulane coming in. So you did get some immediate impact there on special teams. Now, I don't think that – will be the only starters from the group, but I think as far as proven starters that provide immediate contribution, those are the guys that I just listed there going through the portal. Who do I think will, can start out of the group? Now, this is not proven production, of course. I do think Philo ends up starting. I think he does win the job at quarterback because he's got a leg up with the offense. So I think there's a starter from the transfer portal, but not proven, of course. Wanted to transfer tight ends. You just brought in 3 of them. One of them better be a starter or competing with Amir Jackson to be a starter. Take a couple of the offensive linemen with the familiarity aspect that we talked about last week from Penn State, from Georgia Tech. Those guys should be, I think at least a couple of those guys should be starting. So that gets you, Will, to about 19 of the 22 starters of the guys that we went through and retained that were part of it. And the guys that I just listed through the transfer portal, some might be some are proven. Some are immediate impact. Some are immediate impact, and it's not proven. Just the list that I just came up with. So I think just kind of going through the exercise there, I think you got about 19 of the 22 starters just of the kind of talking through it right there. Difference makers, probably only Singleton and Oyebadejo. I think if I'm going difference maker and I'm probably being elitist with that, I mean, like true difference makers, no question about it. I think from the portal, Singleton and Oyebadejo. And that kind of goes to the next question that we did have. Our favorite guys in the transfer portal, those are my 2. And I'll talk more about it, but it's Singleton and Oyebadejo. I think those guys are going to have instant impacts and can be very, very impactful for this Gator team. Those are the ones I say for sure right now that I see as difference makers from the portal. With the proven production. Can Philo be one? Sure. Can one of the other running backs be one? Backing up Jaden Ball? Absolutely. Offensive lineman might be harder to gauge. Yeah, but if I'm putting it at guys that I think I know for sure will be, it's Singleton and Oyebadejo. So, I can add to the difference makers I think are already on the roster. Jaden Ball, VB3, and or Dallas Wilson, probably projection a little bit at wide receiver with those guys, kind of going back to your just previous point. Jaden Woods, a bit of a projection as well, but I think he'll be one. Miles Graham, of course. So there's a handful of impact guys that I've just listed, a couple through the transfer portal, a couple that I already think are on the roster. I don't think Florida lost all that many difference makers either, Will, to the portal either. But I get what, Bull Gator's saying by, with the available spots, there was a chance to get more difference makers maybe. With so many, Florida's over 25 bringing into the transfer portal, kind of preface the whole start of the transfer portal. Florida lost so many guys that a lot of guys are just going to be depth pieces, but with so many open spots, we're asking ourselves, how big of an impact can they make? Are they going to be starting? There's, I think, a lot of ways to look at it, but I think with what Florida lost as well, I don't think Florida lost many. I think Trey Wilson could have been, but couldn't stay healthy. Aiden Mizell, we just kept waiting. Tank Hawkins kept waiting as well. So I didn't lose a whole lot of sleep for guys that left the portal for Florida, and the guys are bringing in. I think pretty even in that regard from what Florida lost and what Florida gained. So. I think I probably agree with Bull Gator in the sense that this roster probably doesn't seem more talented than last year's roster. That was a 4-8 team. Going back to one of your points earlier, I think more of a lack of coaching and lack of development. You and I sat here all preseason, and we liked a lot of the talent on this roster. Is it a championship roster? No, I didn't think it was. But this staff didn't get it anywhere close to the expectations. I'm still putting it more on the staff. There's a reason they were fired. There's a reason why Billy Napier and that staff were fired. I don't think they came close to the expectations. So I don't think it's a 4-8 roster. It's not a championship roster either. But that's the reason I don't think the last staff didn't make it, because I think there is more talent on the roster with what Florida lost. I don't think they lost difference makers. per se. The guys they brought in, maybe a wash, but kind of saying that, I do think there's enough talent once more to get more out of the roster. It's better than 4-8. I'll stand by that. But one more aspect of this, tying it all together, I do think the gap has shrunk too, Will. From the top of the SEC and the rest of the conference, Florida's been much more competitive with Georgia the last couple of seasons compared to before. Beat Texas last season. Now it's been a roller coaster. And I blame that last staff for more of the roller coaster than I do the talent. Now, the premium positions, I think we can go there. Quarterback, offensive line, defensive line. There are some questions. I will fully admit that. Maybe based on projection, but there's enough there to be better than 4-8.
Yeah, I mean, so the statement that I made earlier about you should have a better ability to project how good a player is going to be after they've spent a couple years in college, I think is the thing that rings true here, right? Like, I think we can all look at Singleton and go, yeah, that's a guy who's produced.
Yeah.
The question that I have, and I think the thing that you're sort of getting at, and we won't have a way of measuring it until we get into the season, is a guy like TJ Shanahan, who was sort of an average offensive lineman at Penn State last year, but followed Phil Trautwein to Florida. Does he now give you above average play? Like, do you get a full season where that guy's an interior offensive lineman who's like PFF grade is like 73, 74, 75? And, that's not a huge jump, because I think he was like 64, 65 last year. But it's a jump in terms of like what Florida had at that position last year. And it's a jump in terms of you don't need elite play everywhere to be competitive. What you need is not crappy play. You can't have sieves at various positions and still be successful. So like if your left tackle's bad, like truly bad, your offense is going to struggle no matter how good your quarterback is, no matter how good your running back is. If your left tackle is competent, then a good quarterback and a good running back can take you a really long way. So those are the things I'm really going to be looking at. And, we talked last week about the homegrown guys, but guys like Egan Boyer and TJ Shanahan coming from Penn State, guys like Bailey Stockton coming from Georgia Tech, and Aaron Philo, obviously, guys like, who'd be a good example? Even the punters, right? Like you think about the punters and the kickers and that sort of stuff coming from Tulane. And then you've got the guys who have connections. So Luke Harpering at tight end from Georgia Tech, Singleton, who was at Georgia Tech before. Like the ability of this staff to succeed early is going to be tied to the evaluations on the guys that they know, right? And we'll know, like if these guys are depth pieces, then either Florida got outbid or Florida was not as aggressive going after like who they really thought they needed when they went into the portal, or they were much more comfortable with the guys who were already here. But again, I think some of the guys that like you think about Miles Graham, Vernell Brown, Dallas Wilson, Jaden Woods, and even Jaden Baugh. Those are guys who project, except for Baugh, those are guys who you're making a projection that they're going to be better than they were last year, right? So a 4-8 team, but what we did was we let go of the guys that we don't think project to get better, and what we did was we brought in guys who we think are going to project better overall. But again, I think the thing that I want to make sure that we sort of at least center ourselves with in some capacity is that the Cignetti model of we will win big right away is probably not realistic for every program.
Yeah.
And so 4 years of patience, too much.
Yep.
6 months of patience, too little. and I think in many ways the transfer portal next year is going to be the gauge. So if you think about the way we've always looked at high school, or the way we've always looked at coaches, and Bill wrote a nice article for Read and Reaction probably 6 or 7 years ago, where he looked at SEC coaches and what they saw in their bump class. So the second,
you might want to save this for next week.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying, I think we're really
quickly summarize it, but there's a question that's kind of going to go along with that I will say you can really hit that for next week.
So I think the idea that you need bump talent is not going to change.
Yeah.
The question is, where do you get that talent? And so to me, the first transfer recruiting class is getting everything to replacement level. The second transfer recruiting class is going to be getting difference makers. So, it may be that Singleton comes in and catches 50 balls. He doesn't take some giant jump. It may be that Philo comes in and he's a competent quarterback. But I'll tell you what, a quarterback rating of 150 without throwing 4 interceptions in a couple of different games, or being so scared you're going to throw an interception that you only throw for 65 yards against Miami, just competent and not roller coaster quarterback play throughout the course of the year, this team is at least 500. So at each position, so you don't have to go from bad, which Lagway was the worst quarterback in the SEC last year. You don't have to go from bad to Mendoza.
Right.
You just have to go from bad to not worse than Kentucky, and not worse than Mississippi State, and not worse than some of these teams that
I think we know this, but when you say that, he was one of the worst quarterbacks in the country.
Yeah. He was.
That's what you had at quarterback. And I'm not trying to slam on DJ. I defended him. You defended him. We defended him as much as we possibly could as this thing was happening. And even as he hit the transfer portal, we still think something there. But we can also slap ourselves in the face with the truth. He was a terrible quarterback last year.
Yeah, it was just bad. And so, again, I think you can say that about various spots on the field.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think you can say that about all the spots on the field, but I think if you go look at the PFF ratings, or you look at whatever stat you like looking at, you can look at on-off numbers on SAS and all sorts of stuff like that. There are guys that you can look at and go, yeah, not a difference maker. Defense doesn't get better when he's on. Oh, defense actually gets worse when he's off. Or defense gets better when he's off and gets worse when he's on. Those on-off numbers are pretty telling when you start looking at these sorts of things. And I don't think that this staff is going to have 100% hit rate. I don't think anybody has 100% hit rate. But I think
make sure more guys reach their potential. And I know potential is a scary word right here, but that's what we didn't see with the last staff. If this team's going to be better with a lot of the same pieces, maybe not elevating the talent level to another degree, make sure the guys that you do have and that you brought in, since there's not a lot of proven production, reach their potential.
Well, and you do that by finding edges in recruiting, but you do that by finding edges on the field too, right?
Yeah.
One of the things I thought was really interesting last night is that Cignetti did something that I thought he actually did it right once and did it wrong another time. But on that 4th and 5 play, he wasted a timeout, and it was their second timeout, and then he went out and he went for it. And if he'd have kicked the field goal and you're only up by 6, well, that incentivizes the offense to go for the touchdown. If you miss the 4th and 5, then a lot of times the offense kind of gets lazy. They get to field goal range, and then they kick a field goal range to tie. So your likelihood to lose actually goes up by kicking the field goal there, because now you've telegraphed the offense. The opposing offense, what do they need to do? Now, one time he did it right, and one time he kicked the field goal to go up by 6. Now you can make an argument that with the clock being a little bit later, maybe he had time. But look, if Carson Beck didn't Carson Beck, then that's a completely different situation, because Miami was threatening, and it was entirely possible that they might have had an opportunity to win there at the end. But I think giving your team that edge, once you waste that timeout, you can't kick the field goal with 4 or 5 minutes left. You just can't. Just spent a really valuable asset to stop the clock. You got to go for it. And he did. And I think, now I will say that if Billy Napier had called a QB draw on 4th and 5 and it had been unsuccessful, the crucifixion of one Billy Napier would have been fast, swift, and merciless by Gator Twitter. At the same time,
explaining that play was awesome, because they were like, well, we put this in because we saw it on film.
Yeah.
And you know what? Miami actually splits what Mendoza was talking about it after the game. He was like, well, they came out and it was not what we expected. They were not in the coverage that we expected them to be. Half of it was man, half of it was zone. And that is not what they showed on film at all. And he was like, I just had to go out there and make a play.
Well, and the thing I read was that Miami knew they were screwed. And when they saw the 2x2 coverage, or the 2x2 splits for the wide receivers, they knew that QB sneak was coming, but they made a calculation and not call the timeout there, because they knew they might need the timeouts later. And so Indiana converts that thing because the Miami staff didn't call timeout, even though in the first half, they would have called timeout with that.
So it makes me wonder if
configuration.
Miami was confused and why they. It seemed like they were playing two different coverages there.
All of which to say, having the stones to call a QB sneak on 4th and 5 after you've wasted a timeout, and really 2 timeouts on that drive that were wasted because of a poor communication. I was sitting there going, man, he's going like full Napier here in the 4th quarter, wasted all these timeouts. If he'd have kicked a field goal there, I really would have said that. But finding those edges for your team, right? Whether it's through film study, like the fact that you have a quarterback, like, all the stories coming into this were like, oh, Indiana doesn't practice. Like, they're never out, like they practice less than anybody, but they knew when we see this configuration, this is what's coming. This is what we want to run, all that sort of stuff. So it's not as though they were unprepared. And, so there are multiple avenues to get there. I think the overall question of, are there difference makers? I think there will be a few. I think the percentage of difference makers that Florida gets will really determine I think it's hard to predict which ones are going to be difference makers. Yeah. And then it just becomes a question of, does the inside knowledge that these guys have on their players translate? And if it doesn't, then I think that says something about the staff. If it does, then I think that says something about the staff. We just won't know until like week 7 next year, when we can go back and go, like, TJ Shanahan really turned out, or man, Egan Boyer, like he was really the jewel in the rough, right? Or Bailey.
Yeah, there's no issue for me in admitting there's not known impact guys right now.
Well, and I think
and going to your point, it is about finding those guys, and they're being more than what we think right now.
Well, I think this is the place where Sykes would agree with me in all of this, is that the data when it came to high school recruiting was overwhelming.
Yeah.
That at least the 5-star guys could separate themselves and people could identify the value you were going to get from them. We don't have enough data to go back and say anything for sure about the transfer portals. You see some guys, he's a 3-star 0.85 cornerback, Kanye Clark transfer from UCLA. Like, they're all projections at this point, but they're guys who played real time, right? So one of the guys I'm excited about is Evan Pryor, the running back from Cincinnati, because you look at his stats, you go, wow, that guy's going to hit some home runs, and he's different than what we have out there already. So he's complementary to some of the stuff that they might want to do with Jaden Baugh. So those are all the things that I start thinking about, looking at, trying to understand. The days of like Joe Burrow going in the transfer portal after sitting 2 years at Ohio State are over. Like what would have happened is Burrow would have sat there for the first year, would have gone to the portal like a month before Ohio State season ended, and then would have wound up at a G5 school for a year where he lit it up, and then would have transferred up to Power 5. That's just sort of where we are at this point. So it's a brave new world, man. And I think one of the things that people who analyze stats like me need to be willing to admit is that we don't know. That the data set is not high enough for us we do not have a robust enough data set to say anything with certainty. What we can do is we can look at the Indiana success and we can go, that kind of makes sense. I wonder if that's correlated. But, 5 years from now, we may be looking at Curt Cignetti going, wow, that guy's like the best coach in the country. It's not even close. And, then he went to the Patriots, or then he went to the Titans or whatever and won there too. Right. Like, and it's just going to be one of those things where it's like, oh, it's that guy. And the minute he leaves Indiana, do they go back to being 2-10 every year? Right. And I mean, it's a distinct possibility that that'll happen. And look, I mean, you don't have to go too far from Gator fandom to see that, right? That when Florida's had the right guy in that position, the teams have been really, really successful. And when Florida has not had the right guy in that position, it's certainly been a frustrating team to watch at times.
Yeah, for sure. That gets us to our last question. I'm in sharing graphics too of just kind of what the roster looks like. Not everybody, but mostly everybody I think will contribute, or true freshmen that have come in for the Gators for this coming up 2026 season. And then, so we were asked, of course, and I'm trying to get the name up. It went away right quick. Justin Wood asked, who is your favorite guy that the Gators landed in the portal on offense and defense? So we'll go with that. As I said, spoiler early, it's probably, the easiest one here. Mine would be Eric Singleton Jr. I was just excited as soon as I heard about his name being a possibility for the Gators. the most proven and most productive player Florida got in the portal. And maybe even the most proven and productive player Florida will have on the roster, not just through the transfer portal, will be Eric Singleton Jr. And it really should just help open up the offense, Will. A big play waiting to happen one more time. 162 career receptions for about 2,000 yards, 12.4 yards a catch, 12 touchdowns in his career. I just think a toy for Buster Faulkner to use in many ways, inside, outside. He's versatile, can win off the line of scrimmage, make the tough catch in traffic, win off the line of scrimmage, and stretch the field as well. And I'm just ready to see him paired up with Verdell Brown III and Dallas Wilson. I do think that gives Florida a pretty lethal trio at wide receiver. And I'm excited about Eric Singleton in his own right and his own player, but what I think he can do for the wide receiver group as a whole, I think really can just open up this offense and hopefully help the winning quarterback out. You're on mute, Will.
Of course. So I think Singleton's the obvious choice, at least, in terms of returning production. I would say the guy I mentioned earlier, Evan Pryor, the running back from Cincinnati. I mean, that's a guy who averaged almost 7 yards a carry last year with Cincinnati. Only had like 72 carries, but still, you're talking about an explosive guy on the offensive side of the ball to help take the burden off of Jaden Baugh. And, Jacoby Jackson transfers to Ohio State, but, he and some of the other guys who were in the running back room, not really able to supplement Jaden Baugh. And I think Baugh's work against Florida State was impressive, but you can't do that every week. And so having somebody who both can spell him, but also has the ability to do something different, I think is something that I'm looking forward to seeing. And also a home run hitter, because Baugh is a really effective running back, but he's unless you have an offensive line that can clear the way for him, I don't necessarily see him as like a home run hitter. I see him as the guy who 4 yards, 6 yards, 7 yards, and then 25, right? Because he's able to hit a jump cut, get around and take it downfield, but not necessarily a home run hitter. I think a guy like Pryor is the guy you think about, like where you throw the screen to him, he's got three big uglies in front of him who are there to block, and all of a sudden you see him sort of cutting through the defense and finding his way to the end zone from time to time. And quite honestly, somebody that maybe you can split out wide front on third down, where the defense has to worry, where you can't put a linebacker in or even a star in to take care of him. You gotta think about guarding him with a safety or a corner, because he's going to have the ability to run away from some guys. So on offense, that's probably the guy I'd be looking at other than Singleton.
All right, and on the defensive side, Emmanuel Oyebadejo had to beat some big programs for the Jacksonville State defensive linemen, mainly Texas A&M. Pretty much committed to Florida while he was on Texas A&M's campus visiting. So that's a big win for the Gators. 6'7", about 300 pounds. One more time this past season, full-time starter at Jacksonville State, starting all 14 games for him. Finished the year 43 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. Forced 2 fumbles, breaking up 5 passes at the line of scrimmage, recorded at least 1 sack in 4 different games, can impact as a run defender, as a pass rusher as well. 653 total snaps in 2025, an 81.7 PFF grade, 78.9 run defending grade, a 58.9 tackling grade, and a 76.4 pass rushing grade. Will, how he'll fit in this defense, I'm going to give credit to Gators Online here. And, the quote about how he'll be used, and Florida coaches told him basically how they explained it to me is that I'm going to be the field end, Oyebadejo said. I might line up to the boundary side sometimes, but mainly I'm going to be on the edge to the field. We're going to set the edge, rush the passer from the edge. I'm a versatile guy, so they might move me around sometimes. That's what they see my role being. My weight right now is 295. I haven't been 320 since 2024, so I'm not as heavy as I've seen in my listings. I feel like you can see on my tape that I'm an athletic guy, and I feel like I've been able to maximize my speed at a lighter weight. And then he was also intrigued by the explanation of UF's defensive scheme. It's going to be a mix of multiple fronts, but the main thing is that they're going to have 2 guys on the edge and then 2 guys inside. That's going to be the main thing. As I get to campus, we're going to get even deeper into it all. but that's what they told me. With Jaden Woods coming back, that's going to be really good for the team. I would think it's going to be him on one side, and then they will have another guy on the other side. When I get to campus, get into the playbook, I'll get more into that stuff. So if Jaden Woods is what we want him to be, and Emmanuel Oyebadejo is what I think he can be, that should give Florida some good edges while we still try to see what LJ McCray can bring to the table. If Cam James can take another step. But if he can come even close to replicating the production that he had at Jacksonville State and the potential of a Jaden Woods, Florida's pass rush might be much better this season. But the player I'm most excited for, look, obviously it's not a surprise. I mean, I think I picked probably the 2 highest rated transfers Florida's got in the transfer portal. But obviously I think it's guys that can make a huge impact.
So I disagree with you a little bit on this one. So the first one I'll give you, I think Singleton is the obvious choice. On defense, like Florida's safeties have been so sort of just
that's where I was going to go next, but yep.
That I think DJ Coleman is the guy that I look at, the transfer from Baylor. Yeah. 6.5 tackles for loss last year. He would have been ranked second on Florida behind Miles Graham, who had 7 tackles for loss for the entire season. And then you factor in he's got 2 interceptions. His PFF rating last year was 70. But also, if you look at his PFF rating over the last 3 years, 72.2, 66.4, 70.0. So remember what I've been talking about all night is that you need replacement level play at certain positions to make sure that that position is secure to allow your stars to shine. So if Miles Graham steps up and turns into a monster there at middle linebacker and you get competent replacement level play at safety from DJ Coleman or Cam Dooley, sort of the 2 transfers in at safety, but I look at Coleman specifically because of the tackle for loss numbers. If you get competent play there, then it frees up guys like Jaden Woods. It frees up guys like Miles Graham, frees up guys like Cormani McLean to do what they do best and play really, really well. And I think one of the things that Florida's struggled with over really the past 4 or 5 years, like you think about what Ron Roberts did on the defense, was he just simplified things to have 2 deep safeties, bend but don't break, like let the linebackers roam free because that was the strength of the defense. And when Florida got pressure up front, they won. And when they didn't get pressure up front, they lost. And I think having some versatility at the safety position in a way that Florida has not with Jordan Castell and Bryce Thornton back there. Obviously, Thornton's still around, but bringing in Coleman, bringing in Dooley, one of those guys needs to step up. I sort of look at Coleman as the first one that I go, like that's the guy who seems to me at least to have the profile of what I'm looking for. That it's been a long time since Florida had a safety come up in the run game and really deliver a blow. And 6.5 tackles for loss. That's a guy who spent quite a bit of time in the backfield last year for Baylor.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how safety and star work themselves out. Like I said, Bryce Thornton, I think, probably has a leg up. DJ Coleman as well. I know they're really excited about Cam Dooley coming in with the Kentucky connections as well. So probably slide him in. I know there's some talk maybe Javari Flowers can slide into star nickel if needed. Elijah Owens coming from JUCO. I think they've thrown a lot of options there now as Florida lost some options as well in the transfer portal for the secondary, mainly safety and star. So I'm eager to see that battle when we get to fall camp of how safety and star work out. But should be pretty fun there. But yeah. There we go.
It'd just be nice not to have to play 2 deep, cover 2, cover 4 all the time. Now, look, I think Roberts did the right thing based on personnel.
Good point.
But part of that is if you go look at Jordan Castell over the last 2 years, like his freshman year was the best year that he had in terms of PFF, SIS, and was not somebody who was he had 0 tackles for loss last year. And that's not what Florida asked him to do, right? Florida wasn't asking him to come up to the line of scrimmage and shoot into a gap and hit the running back on 3rd and 2. But I mean, how many times have we seen it? I remember like probably 4 or 5 plays last night where a safety came and shot up. The offensive lineman had to make a choice between the safety and the linebacker. And a couple of times there, the linebacker was able to shoot through past the center or past the guard and get a tackle for loss and put Miami on its heels or put Indiana on its heels, not just because they won something up front, but because they out-schemed the opponent because they were able to bring somebody up who had the versatility to get there. I mean, I can remember 2-3 years ago in that Missouri game, Florida bringing blitzes, and it didn't matter. The offense was able to pick them up. Right. They just, even in blitzing situations where they were trying to confuse the offense, they weren't able to do it. And then they weren't able to win one-on-one battles. So to me, safety is like, obviously pressure up front and havoc covers a lot of the sins on the back end.
As we saw
But
in November in 2024.
But I think this is actually where I would say that the transfer portal for Florida is a little bit incomplete. I think that the incompletion actually comes more along, at least for me, in terms of the offensive and defensive lines.
Mm-hmm.
That if I were looking for true difference makers and depth and that sort of stuff, there might be more leaving than is coming in. And so then the question becomes, okay, well, who's going to step up either through the portal from a projection perspective, or who's going to step up from the high school recruits who have been at Florida, guys who've been there for a while, that are just going to have to step into a bigger role because the starters have left.
And we'll get into that. We got plenty of time to get into that. That position group for me for sure. Like with Burrow leaving. And I'm really high on Mbachu as what he showed as a freshman last year. McLeod coming along as well. Jamari Lyons hopefully is healthier coming up this year. But, yeah, that is a huge question. And I know we've talked about it in the chat, too, in the middle of that defensive line. I mean, you just saw, reading Emmanuel's Oyebadejo's quotes there, he's going to be on the edge. And he's not even – he wants to play around 295, 300 pounds. So you're not counting on him to be a plug in the middle. Yeah, he says he might move around a little bit, but, probably from edge to edge and, we'll see. But not really in the middle of that interior to defensive line. So, yeah, that was – once we lost Burrow, it was one I was like, yeah, maybe we can even upgrade there. Don't think right now we can for sure say Florida has done that. So.
Yeah, and look, I think that's going to be the difference between year one and year two, right? Is that year one, you're just because of timing and getting in a new situation. Sumrall's a little bit of disadvantage too because Tulane made the playoff, and so that delayed his start and being able to get sort of a handle on what's going on. We're in an era now where staffs and their analysts are looking at, all right, who's going to get promoted from G5 next year? And how do we go poach their guys? And then who's going to get fired from Power 4 this year? And how do we go poach their guys? And, a lot of this projection, it used to be you're like, okay, who's that middle linebacker out in Apopka that we need to go visit and woo and all that sort of stuff. Now it's going to be, if we think Mike Norvell is going to get laid off next year, who on that Florida State team do we really want? Who do we need to scout? Who do we need to start putting out feelers to their representation? And how do we start gently tampering as the Seminoles season goes down the tubes once again? And those are all questions that staffs are going to have to ask. And given the rumblings that there have been about nobody following the rules, I think it would behoove Florida to sort of just do what they think is best for the program and not necessarily toe the company line that Greg Sankey wants them to toe. I think you're a fool if you do that at this point. The
Agreed.
The NIL deals are like, if they get rejected by the clearinghouse, that's going to be unenforceable and all those things. It's time to, like, I don't want our guys getting
your hands dirty.
Well, I don't want our guys getting into a fight at the end of the national championship game like Miami had last night. But I would like us to
be there.
I'd like to be at the game. Right. So what does it take to get there? And let's get it done.
Smiley does ask, do you think they'll look at some players hitting the portal from Miami or Indiana? Maybe we'll see. I don't know. I'll go and see who's going to hit the portal. But we'll see. I mean,
we can bring in Alberto Mendoza. Let's
I think he committed to Georgia Tech already. So
there you go.
Philo gone.
Philo replacement.
Yeah, there we go. And then you want to go get the yellow jacket competition there. All right, good stuff, Will. We do have a couple more questions. One reason I stopped you earlier, because this will go to the net. We'll tease it for next week. Jed Keel asks, what does a good 2026 look like for the Gators? Not just the season, but this full year. So that was kind of going back to one of your earlier points there. And then Peyton, Gators Breakdown Plus member, did ask, what advanced metric are you most impressed with regarding Sumrall's defense in the past and hope to see continue at Florida? So there's our two questions for that'll get us going next week, Will. So tease for the audience, and that's what will be on top of mind next week.
It's funny. You always send me 2 questions. I'm like, how are we going to spend an hour going through 2 questions? And then I
We
forget.
just did.
I forget how I can't stop talking. So hopefully people enjoyed it.
Hey, that's one reason I like doing the chats too. It gives me another episode where my voice gets out, and then when I bring Will on, I'm just like, hey, people can hear me in the chat a little bit with Will, but Will, everybody likes the well, I won't say everybody likes, because not everybody likes what I have to say. Not everybody likes what you have to say. We hear it, believe me. But hey, we've been doing this long enough. Where we are who we are.
You know what you're
unapologetically.
Getting. So the good news is tonight I actually said I don't know. So that's not something you hear from me very often. So don't tell my wife.
Touche. All right, everybody. Will Miles at Will Miles SEC right here on Gators Breakdown. David Waters, you can follow me at GatorDave_GB. Guys and girls out there, thank you for joining us for another episode of Gators Breakdown.